Biotechnology and Informatics, and I am going to present the topic extremolyte conservation, extremophyte conservation, and extremolyte production from desulfurid peroxide. So, coming to introduction, this is not definitely my room, but it is the room of the Burj Khalifa. It is most luxurious room in the world. This is also not my room, but the point is we are living in very comfortable position. Means we have ACs, we have fan, we have heater. Even animals are living in very comfortable conditions. But there are some microorganisms which are thriving in very extreme conditions, like very high temperature, very cold temperature. Even some are found at 41 kilometers above the Earth. So some theories suggest that they are called extraterrestrial. Extremophiles, which are living in these extreme conditions. So how they are defending their system means if we are going to these volcanoes, definitely we will be burned. But what is the defense mechanism against them? These are some facts, extreme facts about the extremophiles. Like some are living at 4,000 meters under the seawater. Some are living without water. Some can survive at 100 degrees centigrade. So these are the small molecules, which is the main defense mechanism against the very various extremophiles. These are called the extremolites. These are the extremolites. Some of the examples are ectoine or hydroxyectoine. So what the extremolite actually does? They gather around this protein or our rock structure, and they protect from the high temperature or the radiation or the high salt concentration. These extremolites do not interfere with the chemical properties, but they interfere with the physical properties of particular protein. So, in our experiment, we have chosen the microorganism as the desulfurid anaphylaxis. These are some facts about this desulfurid anaphylaxis. That this is the only bacteria found in the water samples beneath the 2.8 kilometers underground, and it is survived for the various millions of years by getting the energy from the radioactive decay. It is considered as the world's only one species ecosystem, and it can survive without oxygen, light, and exposure to extreme heat. So this is the scientific information about the candidate desulfurid peroxide MP104C-10. This is all detail about it. So what are the defense mechanisms that desulfur should have? First, it is high radiation. It is living in the high radiation zone, so desulfurid must have defense mechanism against the high radiation. Then high temperature. It should also have the defense mechanism against high temperature and definitely against the high concentration. So now the defense mechanism of this desulfurid is still unknown because it is discovered in 2008. It's a recent discovery. Means its sequencing is completed in 2008. So the defense mechanism is not well known. So what we have done, we have chosen the particular organisms which are from the similar but extreme background, like high radiation first. High radiation, it is a well-known bacteria, the Deinococcus radiodurans. It can survive cold, dehydration, vacuum, and acid. It is the world's toughest bacteria in the Guinness Book of World Records, and it is due to very active, hyperactive rare genes and multi-copy of genomes. But this cannot be the mechanism of desulfurid because three main reasons. Desulfurid have the endospore, but radiodurans do not have any endospore. Then desulfurid have inactive rare genes, so there is no active mechanism of DNA repair. Then desulfurid have single copy of genome. Then next is high temperature. There are many bacteria, and these extremophile thermophilic bacteria. We have scientists have isolated the extremolite. That is actually we are going to see in this presentation. Similarly, for the high salt concentration. So why we are choosing this H2molate? Because in this particular species D-sulfuridis, there are still no research about the H2molate. Then this H2molate can sustain the high temperature, then they are anti-radiation, then they can protect the DNA and other proteins, and they can sustain the high salt concentration. So here the starting of our analysis. So we proceed with the phylogenetic classification. Then we choose the specific organism nearby this D-sulfuridis in its classification system and evolutionarity. This data we get from NCBI. So we choose these different type of species. Particular microorganisms which have the active ACTA gene. Then we took the ACTA gene from that particular microorganism and blood I have done. In this graph, we got the genes. We got the gene list from our blast data. Then I have put this genes on this genome. Here on x-axis gene number, which is the D-sulfuridis gene number, and on y-axis there is nucleotide number. So when we put this gene on this, mark the gene on this graph, we get these two clusters, D-sulfuridis, where the light shaded regions are the probable region where we can form this ACTA gene. And these. For confirming our result, I go through same procedure with the known gene sequence. Here I have taken the cobalamin biosynthesis gene, particular analysis. You can see that our resources are under tremendous pressure. Global warming and pollution, these are the hot topics. If we are lucky to find this gene in particular region, we can isolate the gene and amplify in the common host like E. coli and Pseudomonas caudati. Some of the scientists already isolated gene from the H2 file and successfully transferred it to E. coli. Then culture prediction. There is no culture known for this particular genus D-sulfuridis. Even I sent mail to FDCC and ATCC, and I got reply from them that there is no culture available for this. So we grateful to Dr. Lee Han Lin, Department of Geoscience, Princeton University, USA, which are the main scientists in the sequencing of this D-sulfuridis. And I approached to this scientist, and he gave me his original papers and other literature about this project. I mailed to AAAS that I need this particular document. Then they told me that you can use this document as a non-commercial purpose. So they also sent me literature about this H2 files. Questions? Okay.
Good morning everyone. That is, the world population demand for increasing energy and transportation fuels is growing steadily. Approximately 2/3 of the total global resources are located in Middle East and they are declining. So it has already led ethanol as a use of liquid fuel. So the increase in oil price and decreasing oil reserves has led to find the alternative production for ethanol. The contents of my presentation include introduction, sources of bioethanol, objectives, methodology, results and discussions, conclusion and references. Three important routes, that is from starch and sugary crops from cellulose. This cellulose can be obtained either by chemical hydrolysis with the help of acids or by enzymatic hydrolysis with the help of various commercial enzymes like cellulase. This is a simple diagram showing chemical hydration of ethylene, which is catalyzed by common catalyst known as phosphoric acid, which is adsorbed on an inert support like diatomaceous earth. Introduction. What is bioethanol? Bioethanol is basically ethanol produced from the renewable biosources or biomass. It is produced by anaerobic fermentation of sugars in This is a flowchart showing the bioethanol production. Basically, it involves 5 major steps. Number 1 is biomass pretreatment. Biomass pretreatment is basically done for making the lignocellulosic material amenable for hydrolysis. This includes both physical and chemical treatment. Physical treatment is given for size reduction, whereas chemical treatment is done to make the enzyme accessible for conversion of this cellulose. The second is the cellulose hydrolysis. Cellulose hydrolysis is the breakdown of cellulose into sugars. Third is glucose fermentation, that is the microbes will use this sugar and finally ferment it into ethanol.
Very exciting. We have had these presentations from Ankita, Ganesu, Himanshu, Soumya, Rohit and Sharvishta. I think all of them have done an extraordinary job. They all kept to time. And I think this was very good because the interaction was also very active. And so what I did was just now, as she was summarizing, I wrote a little limerick just now, just here in the mall. That said, there came to MNIT some scholars with the hope of biotechnology dollars. From papers they read, their knowledge gathered is spread. Fun project was part of the game. Let's wish them on their path to fame. Thank you very much.
To present the mental success company. Thank you so much for chairing this session. This being the last session containing the oral presentations, we wish to acknowledge our judges. The panel composed of Dr. Anita Pandey from the G.V. Pant Institute of Himalayan Environment and Development, Almora, and Dr. Shanti Sundaram from the Center for Biotechnology, University of Allahabad. Professor Mishra is a professor in the Agriculture and Food Engineering Department at IIT Kharagpur. He has over 25 years of professional experience in teaching and research. He has many novels to his credit, such as All India Food Processors Association President's Award for his outstanding contribution to growth and development of food processing industry. His research areas include food products development, health and nutraceuticals, quality control and management in food processing industry. He has published several papers and popular articles in reputable journals of national and international reviews and has many Indian patents to his credit. Sir, we welcome you to take your seat as it is. We are Professor Mishra. This session is composed of 2 keynote addresses and 3 oral presentations in the non-competitive category. The time limit for keynote speakers is 20 minutes and 10 minutes for oral presentees. Professor Mishra, I now invite you to kindly conduct this session of the conference.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. There are 6 speakers, 2 keynote speakers, I think 4 oral presentation. So, as a teacher, I am habitual to taking attendance in class. And I know that practically I think I will be flexible to the timings. These 2 are the keynote addresses. Then the Dr. T. Santibala, Dr. Prabhat Nath Jha, Dr. Jha, yes, and then Dr. Salji Purva, very good, excellent, Alu, from that 10, I think it is 12:30, and we plan to close the session by 1:30, because the people will be hungry after they will have to take food accordingly. So we are generally given 20 minutes time for the material speaker. I will again like to request you to kindly confine your talk to 15 minutes so that 5 minutes we can devote to question and answers. This is something that my young friends they must be interested in having some interaction with you. Professor Janulata Kumar is currently working as emeritus scientist in CSIR, National Institute of Oceanography.
I think I'll straight away start because he's going to chase me out in 15 minutes. My topic is going to be bioprospecting, and what I'm trying to say is how do we do ecologically directed bioprospecting. Next slide. Metals in hydrothermal wells. Next please. Next. Now the ecological niche, when you get these kind of extreme conditions, when you have a coastal marine system, you have endophytic fungi which are in algae, mangrove, seagrasses, then you have fungi associated with animals, especially in the coral reefs, then you have fungi in the marine solar saltons and detritus, and when you go to the open oceanic waters, you have a deep sea, then you have hydrothermal vents. You have suboxic sediments, as you know in India, in the western coast in the Arabian Sea, you have a permanent perennial oxygen minimum zone at 1,000 meter depth, where the oxygen levels are almost zero, and this is a very unique ecosystem which we are privileged to have it, where we can do a lot of work on it. Then of course Dead Sea we don't have, but we have gas hydrates and methane seeps, where they recently discovered a lot of fungi and bacteria. Next please. So now, how do you go about doing ecologically directed bioprospecting? Because you know what conditions are there and you know what kind of organisms you are looking for. So that's what I call ecologically directed bioprospecting. So you use isolation techniques using different special techniques and special media, and then you try to study the protein and enzymes, whatever you want, you try to characterize these enzymes, and then you need to optimize these conditions for their productions, then you need to scale it up, and then of course you go for applications, and that is the major part where we want to use these organisms for. Next please. Now India has an exclusive economic zone of 2013 million square kilometers, which is all around, and we have a coastline of about 7,510 kilometers, and then in these regions we have coral reefs, mangroves, estuaries, and open ocean and deep sea ecosystem. And go next. No, previous. So I am going to talk mostly about the marine fungi, because my specialization is fungi. So I am going to talk about fungi which are in these found in extreme conditions. So you have two types of fungi. We have obligate marine fungi which require sodium for the growth and for reproduction. So the obligate fungi are those which can grow and sporulate in the presence of sodium ions. And then you have facultative marine fungi which can grow even in the absence of sodium ions. And then you find this, we have found in the calcareous substrates, the calcareous remnants of animals which you find, and they are all growth by these fungal filaments. Then you have rotting mangrove wood where you have inside fungal hydrates. Then you have sediments where you find these fungal hydrates. Then you have some of the sea grasses have these kind of endophytic fungi, and these are the parasites of algae. And then we have also found fungi in the corals and on the surface of the algae. Next please. Yeah, now the main purpose was when we started our work, one paper company wanted us to do some work with marine fungi and use them for paper industries. So the question they asked is why marine fungi? Then we said because marine fungi are tolerant to salt and chlorides and sulfates, they can tolerate alkaline pH. So in the biopulping usually they use sodium hydroxide for biopulp for pulping, and the pulp is extremely alkaline conditions. So if you have fungi which can tolerate alkaline pH, you can use them for pulping. That's from a mangrove detritus, and we were screening for the presence of alkaline xylanates, And we found that this particular fungus produced highly alkaline xylanase, thermostable xylanase, and we could use it for bio-bleaching of pulp. And this fungus treated pulp could use only 30% that reduced chlorine content for achieving the same target of brightness. And now what are the qualities of xylanase which you require for this kind of biopulping? First is it should be cellulose free, because you don't want to disturb the cellulose of the paper pulp. The xylanase produced by our fungus, and we found that it was absolutely cellulose free. There was no cellulose in that, and it had 2 pH optima, 3.5 and 8.5. And it had also optimum temperature of 55 and 90 degrees, and it was stable at 55 degrees for 4 hours, and it was a low molecular weight, and besides xylanase, it had also beta-xyloxidase and arabinosidase activity. Seagrasses are highly, they have 50 to 70% lignocellulose, so we should have fungi which can produce lignin degrading enzymes growing when this detritus seagrasses become detritus on the seashores. Especially these are the Lakshadweep Islands, which is a very rich source of seagrass. These seagrasses are nothing but angiospermic plants, but they can grow completely underwater in the seawater. For any fungus is that when it